Can we finally see the light at the end of the tunnel with the Washington Wizards? Today we have special guest Jonathan Von Tobel to help us answer that question. Next on Locked On Wizards.
You are Locked On Wizards, your daily Washington Wizards podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, everybody? It's your boy Brandon Scott again. Your favorite podcast now has a newsletter introducing the Locked On Wizards daily newsletter, a one-stop shop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. Sign for free now at LockedOnDaily.com. That's LockedOnDaily.com, and start your day with an all-new free Locked On Wizards newsletter. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Today we have special guest Jonathan Von Tobel, host of Primetime on VSiN. How you doing today, man?
I'm really good. Excited to talk a little hoops, especially Washington Wizards hoops.
Absolutely. The Wizards have a long road hidden. This is year 2 of a long rebuild, but a lot to talk about today. I kind of fit this roster into 3 tiers. Rookie guys who are definitely part of the core going forward. Gray area players like Jordan Poole, Sadiq Bey, who, if you look at their age, they could be part of the future, but they could also be trade assets. And looking at the third tier, which is the veterans who are going to be moved at some point, your Jonas Valanciunas, your Malcolm Brogdon, your Kyle Kuzma. So we're going to start with the Wiz kids, Bilal Coulibaly. I mean, he has shown that. I mean, we knew he was a dog on the defensive end, but offensively, could this be his breakout campaign? And how good can he be?
I mean, it seems like that's this start through 4 games has been awesome. Shooting, now I don't know if he's going to shoot 60% essentially, right, for the rest of the year, but the fact that the three-point shot is going down and it looks pretty smooth on increased volume so far this season, if he can add just any sort of consistent offensive game to what we already expected him to be, man, you guys hit it out of the park. I mean, you need wing players who can space the floor and play. That's what you want in today's NBA. I've been really impressed with him so far this year, and I think it's going to be kind of the theme for Washington for me through the early portion. And look, it's 2 games against the Hawks. Hawks are a little beat up, but still, I mean, he was wildly impressive the other night when he beat the crap out of him himself with 27 points on 11-14 shooting. So I think Coulibaly, everything you see looks like the real deal. It doesn't seem like a fluke when you look from shooting mechanics, his fluidity, the way he's moving the ball. That kid seems like he has taken a really strong step forward here in the first 4 games.
Well, I agree 100%. I think he's a star in the making. I mean, we knew what he could do defensively. He shined early on in his rookie year defensively, just his instincts, his ability to get in passing lanes, blocking steals, just unreal on the defensive end. But offensively, that was one part of his game that, you kind of want to see him kind of progress slowly. And I was a firm believer that next year was probably going to be his breakout campaign, but he said, hold my beer. I mean, this very well could be his breakout campaign because if you look at the improvements he's made over the offseason, I mean, improved ball handling, mid-range game, his three-point shot, he's not hesitant to take that shot, which confidence is a big thing with young players. And he's showing the confidence. He's attacking the basket. He's finishing through contact. I mean, he checks all the boxes. I mean, the kid is a star in the making. But, outside of Bilal Coulibaly, 3 really nice young players that were acquired in the draft this year, and Keyshawn George, Alex Sarr, and Bub Carrington. All 3 of these guys, man, have shown that they could be really high-impact guys for the Washington Wizards going forward. To you, which one of these guys are you most excited about?
I think it's Carrington. Like, I think when we've watched him so far and increased minutes in the second game against Atlanta, and you really saw him start to take off a little bit. Didn't take that many shot attempts, but still, you're talking about shooting 62%, floated around 15 points in that game, somewhere like that. And just I thought the real upside for this kid was going to be offensively, and you're really starting to see that. But what I've been impressed with was his facilitating looks pretty good, right? Like, he looks like he's making all the right reads, knows where he's finding open guys. He had 6 assists in that second game against Atlanta. Like, that I think is the upside look, right? I thought that he could be a pretty good scorer, and you were just going to let him run, and especially by the end of the year, once those veterans like you talked about were gone, and let's just take some bumps and bruises with a young guard. But he looks like he's got some really good vision, and the scoring was already there we expected. That to me has been the biggest surprise, and I think that is the one I'm most excited about, because if he can be a really good facilitator as well, I wasn't really expecting that personally.
Oh, I'm with you. Coming out of Pitt, you saw the offensive potential with him, but you see floor general potential with him. And, he's very polished for such a young player. Another young player to look at, another Frenchman, Alex Sarr, had a really bad summer league. And a lot of people were already ready to call this man a bust, but I know early on that rim protection was probably going to be the first part of his game you're going to see from him, and he's shown that he can defend the paint at a high level. The potential with his offense is there. You see the potential, but Alex Sarr, do you see star potential with him, or do you see a high upside role guy? What is kind of the best case scenario with Alex Sarr going forward?
Yeah, so obviously the offense is like the real question, right? Like that's the one I'm waiting to kind of see. Still shooting about 30% from the floor, so we'll see if that really takes off and if he's going to be a little bit better, especially around the rim. But man, I bet his on what day is it? Thursday. So on Wednesday, that game against Atlanta, I bet him over his rebound. So I was watching him really closely. He ultimately didn't get there. Got in foul trouble early in the first quarter. I think he had like 2 fouls in the first, and ultimately had to sit for a little bit, but. Dude, he's really impressive in almost every other facet. He had 4 really impressive blocks. The 5 rebounds he had were really, really strong. The way he can defend and just challenge shots and force guys to miss. I think it was really, for a game in which the guy only scored 11 points and shot 33% from the floor, he was wildly impressive. And I still think he finished like plus 11 or somewhere in that range when he was on the floor in that game. I really like it. So I think there's some real strong upside. And if he does figure it out offensively, I know that in the draft process, I think one of the reports, right, was that he viewed himself as potentially like a Giannis role, right? One of those forwards that can have the ball along the perimeter, can attack, and do those sort of things. If he does get that, if he's going to be a dominant offensive player that could put rim pressure on, I mean, going back to Bilal Coulibaly, if that 3-point shot fits for him, and those are 2 of your guys up front, like, or along the wing that you're going to have defensively with the upside on offense, it's going to be great. But I was actually really impressed. That was the closest I'd watched Sarr in the first 4 games yesterday because of that rebound prop tracking it. I was really impressed in that last game.
Oh, absolutely. I think that, obviously when people, a lot of experts saying that this draft was relatively weak, but I think in the long term, everything's in hindsight. I think in hindsight, this is going to be probably the most important draft in this rebuild for the Washington Wizards because Will Dawkins has proven he's playing chess, not checkers. I mean, he acquired 3 high-impact guys in this draft that are going to be really nice pieces, part of this young core going forward. And, a lot of eyes are on the 2025 draft, Cooper Flagg, Ace Bailey, Dylan Harper. But I think that, and yes, they have a lot of star potential in this draft coming up. And I think that the face of the franchise, a lot of people looking at Bilal, but I think there's going to be 2 faces. I think the guy that we acquire in this draft coming up is going to be the guy, whether it's Cooper Flagg, whether it's Ace Bailey. But another thing the Wizards are kind of known for is not really utilize second-round picks, right? Last year, we were able to get Tristan Vucevic, and he turns out to be a really high upside prospect, but obviously Rashawn Holmes, Marvin Bagley III, and Jonas Valanciunas standing in his way. Looking at the deadline, a lot of these guys are going to be moved at some point, looking at the veterans, that is. Do you see extended look at Tristan Vucevic in the second half?
I mean, they have to, right? That's kind of the thing. And it's interesting. So their win total, Washington's, was 20.5 heading into the year. They got to slow down, right? They've already got 2. So we'll see if they actually start to take some lumps, which I'm sure they will start to. But once those guys go, I mean, that's the whole point, right? Is give these guys run. Like, let's see what you have. Let's see if Vucevic has something at this point. You have to put him out there and see it. And you might take some lumps as you go down, but that's kind of the whole point, is allow these guys to grow and take those issues so then you can see if you have something. So I would assume, like, by the time we get to post-trade deadline, I don't know if he's starting, but he's going to be in that lineup with some regularity to just see what you have on that back end, especially when you look at the roster around it. Like you said, like up front, with Kyle Kuzma and Valanciunas, like those are guys that you can potentially ship off. And Valanciunas, what was it, a 3-year deal? I think somewhere around that, right? 3 to 30.
Yeah, 3 for 30. Yep.
Yeah, but that's a tradable deal, right? I think teams will willingly take that. So we'll see if he's going to be there. But regardless, a vast majority of these guys are going to be gone. You got to see what you have. And I would be surprised if guys like Tristan don't get really good run by the time we get to like February, March.
Oh, I agree 100%. I think Tristan can definitely play at a high level. I mean, he's shown that he can be, he can stretch the floor. You see the rim protection with him. So I'm very intrigued to see what he can do in the second half. So we talked about the gray area guys. We're going to talk about them next. Jordan Poole, Sadiq Bey, and Corey Kispert. Could they be around for a little bit, or are they looked at as trade assets? So we're going to get into that. But before we do, tonight's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live, play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the National Football League. All right, let's get back into this. All right. We kind of mentioned gray area guys. Jordan Poole, Sadiq Bey, and Corey Kispert. Jordan Poole. Now, I'm a big Jordan Poole guy, and I was very excited with him putting over from Golden State. Last year, he dealt with a lot of trials and tribulations, up and down season. But so far this season, he's playing like he has a chip on his shoulder, like he's ready to put the league on notice. So, looking at Jordan Poole, kind of a two-part question. One, what is his ceiling going forward? He's 2 years away from hitting his prime. And two, do you see him being a long-term piece here in DC, or is he strictly, once the value gets up there, you see the Wizards eventually moving on?
Yeah, I mean, I think his ceiling is high-end starter. I mean, we kind of saw it in Golden State, right? And the whole thing that happened there, he kind of gets screwed over with the situation. And like you mentioned, it's probably pretty hard to go through that in a spot where I think he kind of got screwed from a narrative standpoint by Golden State. And then you have a pretty poor year by his standards, especially from an efficiency standpoint. He was in the 40th percentile in terms of points per 100 shot attempt last year. And he is the complete opposite of that through the first 4 games so far. He's absolutely lighting nets on fire. So I do wonder if he is going to be able to keep the efficiency up. Because if he is, I mean, do you want to get rid of him? Because like you said, the timeline's not that far off from a young core that Washington is starting to build. And I do think maybe when you get toward the tail end of that contract is when you start to see some teams intrigued by it. But you've got this year that's nearly 37. It's like 29.7. Then you've got 31 and then 34 on the books for him too in terms of millions. I think that's kind of a hard contract to ship off, like 2 years over 60, if like that's going to be the next few years. So I would assume just by default he's going to be there. But there's worse things to happen if he's going to have the season that he's had so far. I mean, we're talking 46% from the floor, 57% from three. Those will probably take some steps back. But if he's going to go back to efficient scorer, I think that Washington would be fine to have him there with some of the young pieces they have in that backcourt. He's been great.
Oh, absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. Efficiency. There seems to be a problem with the Wizards, not only with JP13, but players like Kyle Kuzma. Efficiency has been a big problem. But I agree with you. If he shows he can show a high level of efficiency, I think we definitely hit a diamond in the rough. Now, other things that kind of impressed me about Jordan Poole last year, again, caught a lot of smoke. But with him kind of keeping his head down, keep working, they reverted him to a 6-man role. He took it, played well. Tyus Jones went down with a back injury, came in and he started and he showed what he could do as a starting point guard, dictating the pace. They was number 2 in pace, I believe. I mean, this team moved the pace. They were a better team. But other things I kind of looked at this first 4 games is the vision. I think he's a very underrated scorer. Or not scorer, but passer. I mean, he was throwing some dimes in there where, he was having nice where he was having 6 assists, but you can argue he had 9 because there's a few passes here and there where people just weren't capitalized on his passes. And his leadership. Last night, Bub Carrington, it was Garrison Matthews knocked him to the floor. Bub Carrington was going to get up and he looked like he's ready to fight. And Jordan Poole went over there and said, no, not the time for that. Look, settle down, just get to the free throw line. The leadership for such a young player. And, look, he's 25. He's probably a year or 2 from his prime. And if you look at the contract situation, a lot of these vets, the timeline's 3 years, right? Jonathan Von Tobel, 3-year contract. Sadiq Bey, 3-year contract. Kyle Kuzma, the same. And Jordan Poole, the way I kind of view it is, he's going to hit his prime right around the time you see pay dirt from a lot of these rookies. Bilal has already shown that he can take that step. Bub Carrington, Keyshawn, Alex Sarr, all shown that they can be contributors. Now, once we get to that point, he's going to be in his prime. So I'm with you. You definitely keep a player like that. That was a big reason why I was kind of against the Denny trade, even though I do like the package he got in return because, on one side you look at it as like you got a 23-year-old player that you developed, you drafted him, developed him, signed him to a cheap contract, and then just to let him go. But then I understand what they're doing with the front office because we're about to get into Corey Kispert. You would see a similar situation with him. But getting back to Jordan Poole, I think he's a keeper. I think you keep him around because I think he has all-star potential. And I think that this year, if he can continue to show what he's doing, the way he's doing right now, most improved players should not be a pipe dream. I think he could definitely be in consideration for most improved players. So we kind of mentioned his name already, Corey Kispert. They just signed him to a ridiculous extension where, again, it's kind of a two-sided coin. It's cheap for the Wizards to keep him around for a veteran guy who, look, he's a sniper, high basketball IQ, improved ball handling. He can move without the basketball, but is also attractable to other teams so kind of looking at that. Do you see the Wizards taking the Denny Avdia approach? Do you sign him to a really team-friendly deal? Do you see them eventually moving on from Corey Kispert, or is he a keeper like Jordan Poole?
Yeah, I think he's the most interesting one because I think you make the argument for both, right? He's on the expiring. He's only about $5.5 million. I think he's a restricted free agent next year, or in the summer. So you're going to look and say, all right, any team that's going to offer him, we can obviously match and do all that kind of stuff. But you could probably also, in a league that is looking for Corey Kispert's at a pretty cheap price, probably get something pretty nice for him. But I think for the most part, when you look at building this team, I think that if I'm team constructing, Corey Kispert's the guy that I'm hanging on to. Like, he's probably not going to be worth that much in terms of like financially. I think Cleaning the Glass has a projected for like $17 million on a new deal for next year. So like that'll be something that is relatively like you can eat that, right? Because that's worth it given what he's done for you statistically. And you're probably going to get the assets you're looking for the other guys that we're going to talk about, right? Like for the Kyle Kuzmas and for the Malcolm Brogdons and maybe Valanciunas of the world that you already have on your roster and maybe others. I would think that Kispert is one of the guys that you kind of buy into in the long term. You don't have to pay him a ton. He serves a valuable role. And timeline-wise, we're talking about a pretty similar age to Jordan Poole, and you don't have to break the bank to keep him around. So I would think that Kispert is probably somebody you're retaining here if you're Washington, right?
Oh, absolutely. I'm with you on that. I mean, you keep a Corey Kispert around.
Yeah.
He's impressed me not only with his sharpshooting ability, but high basketball IQ. You know, again, if you look at a lot of these programs like Gonzaga, North Carolina, there's a reason why they put so many NBA-ready guys out there because the basketball IQ and his ability to move without the basketball. That's another skill that's forgotten in the NBA now, moving without the basketball. You know, to me, one of the best sharpshooters ever, Ray Allen, what made him great outside his shot was his ability to move without the basketball and set himself up and get him into those positions and get those good looks. So his movement without the basketball is immaculate. The biggest thing, too, is his improved ball handling. And he's showing a lot more effort on the defensive end. Is he ever going to be a lockdown defender? No. But he's a guy that, you know, he's shown a lot more effort on the defensive end. And it means a lot to a team where they're trying to build a defensive identity in DC. You know, versatility and defense are the two things that you look at. Bilal, high-level defender, versatile. You know, Denny was, you know, the same thing with Alex Sarr. So Saddiq Bey, DMV guy, he's from Baltimore, had an ACL injury. They were able to get him on the cheap. So again, kind of a two-part question here. Obviously, was the biggest factor of them bringing him here was the fact that he was injured, because without the injury, you're not getting him on that price tag. And looking at Saddiq Bey, do you see him as a future piece, or is it kind of a prove it at this point because he's coming off that injury?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of a prove it coming off of the injury, right? Given, again, like you're talking about age-wise, by the time, you know, he's not that old. Again, we're talking about the Jordan Poole, Corey Kispert age range, about 25 and a half years old. But given the injury, and like I've got a buddy who is a big Detroit Pistons fan, and at the beginning of his career, I used to text him all the time. I love Saddiq Bey. Like when you saw the upside of Bey, especially those first couple of years, you were like, holy smokes, like you kind of got something here. It kind of tapered off a little bit, but you got a knockdown 3-point shooter who can really stretch the floor for you when he is really on. And you saw a dip in that last year. Didn't shoot particularly well, especially in those last 63 games or the last few games of the season. But I do think that this is a piece that, especially that you talked about, he's not making more than $6.5 million in any of the 1 years that he has had on this contract that they've got. I don't know if that's a piece for now, but I definitely think like next year, for example, if he comes back, he's healthy, and he's the Saddiq Bey, especially from a shooting standpoint we saw in the first few years of his career. And then all of a sudden you're looking at, I got like 2 years, $12 million on a knockdown 3-point shooter like Saddiq Bey. Yeah. That dude's going to be plenty of value. So I would assume he's still there at the end of this year, but I'm assuming next year is probably the time where you probably look to move him if you do want to do that. But he could be valuable for them. I love Saddiq Bey.
Oh, same here. I think he's a baller. I think he's a guy who definitely makes his team better. I'm with you. They say that he could play a quarter of the season, but I don't see the point. Yeah. I mean, sit him for the rest of the year. You know, bring him back next year, see if you can bring the value up. And if you want to move him, you can move him. And like I said, at his age and with his ability, you got a guy who could contribute, and you got him on the cheap. And then this is another good move by Will Dawkins, because, I mean, we've been through many different GMs here. And Will Dawkins is a breath of fresh air because we finally have adults in the building in the front office. You know, long are the days of Ernie Grunfeld and Tommy Shepard. So Will Dawkins has impressed me overall with a lot of these moves, man, you know, building through the draft and supplementing through free agency, which is the OKC model. So we're going to talk about some of these vets, man, because like I said, a lot of these vets will not be in DC at the deadline. But before we do, tonight's episode is brought to you by Gametime. So you guys know me. I go to games all year round. Baseball time is Camden Yards and Nats Park. You know, football, my Commanders, and then basketball, obviously the Wiz and George Mason. But to me, Gametime is the best app out of all of them. I'm not even going to name drop nobody, but there's 3 reasons why. Well, number one, Gametime picks. Creation makes it easier to save more on sports tickets, but not only sports tickets, concerts, comedy shows, theater events, etc. What else? All in pricing. Talking to the feature shows the total upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. So a $50 ticket doesn't end up being a $90 ticket, right? And seat views. Get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy, so you know exactly what your view is and if you get your money's worth. So look, do yourself a favor and take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. And again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Game time. All right, let's get back into this. So, before we roll, man, we're gonna talk about the vets. Now, it's kind of like it kind of mirrors last year to a certain degree. You know, where you in the first half of the season, you have vets where you want to showcase them, see if you can move them at some point, and then in the second half of the season, you want to make it a youth movement. And and then these are words straight out of Will Dawkins' mouth. You know, I talked to him at media day, and he said, "Look, this team's gonna get younger after the deadline. They plan on moving on from a lot of these veterans, man. And they all kind of have their own risk to a certain degree. We're gonna start with Kyle Kuzma. You know, we know he can be that scorer. Efficiency, can take a hit, can be turnover prone. Contract very team friendly, both for the Wizards and for prospective teams who want to add a scorer off the bench or in the starting five and don't want to break the bank to do so. But the asking price last year was 2 first-round picks. Do you see them getting that asking price, and what kind of realistic package do you see in return for Kyle Kuzma?
Yeah, I don't know if it's going to be that lucrative, right? Especially if he keeps playing, like, at least from an efficiency standpoint, the way that he has been so far this year. The points per shot attempt is really down so far this year, as you well know. Some of the other numbers are a little down. So only 3 games. He missed the second Atlanta game, so probably going to be a little bit better. I don't know if it's going to be that expensive, but he's going to be in demand. I mean, one of the teams that's already been linked out there, 2 West Coast teams, right? Los Angeles Lakers and, of course, the Golden State Warriors. And I think a team like Golden State could really use somebody like that on that roster. I think it'd be great for them. And we'll see, especially with some weird questions about both Jonathan Kuminga's relationship with them and, of course, Andrew Wiggins and the downturn we've seen in his career. You could definitely fit in Kyle Kuzma there. And who knows what that brings back. Maybe it's a first-round pick. Maybe it's a disgruntled Jonathan Kuminga who might not want to be on that team anymore, right? Like, that'd be pretty interesting. But I think for the most part, it would make sense because you hit the nail on the head. I think a lot of people think that Kuzma's contract is probably a bear, but it's not. It's declining, right? I think it was front-loaded. So his last year, he's only making $19 million. That's pretty good for a team that is looking at a player of that caliber that can really make them a lot better. So I would assume that if you're Washington, I would assume he's on the move. I mean, you're probably getting a pretty good amount. Again, 2 first-round picks, not sure, but you're probably getting something good for Kyle Kuzma.
Yeah, I agree. I think, I thought it last year. 2 first-round picks is a lot because, you could pencil him as that, that 20 points a night scorer, but there's other areas that you definitely want more from Kyle Kuzma. When you compare him to other, like wings, if you compare him to Mikal Bridges or an OG Anunoby, it's no comparison. They're obviously better players than he is, even though he is a really good player, but he's just not on the level of Mikal Bridges. To me, he's that high of an impact guy that's really gonna, you know what I mean, be that final piece to a team. So, Jonathan, you brought up Jonathan Kuminga. I'm a big fan of Jonathan Kuminga. Obviously, they didn't reach a rookie extension. What would you do? Would you entertain if you were Golden State? Would you entertain Jonathan Kuminga for Kyle Kuzma?
I'd be very curious because I think that you could make the argument that Kuminga has more value just considering his age, right, and the upside and whatever it's going to be. And that would seem like a pretty lopsided deal for the most part. But if you're a team like Golden State that thinks it can compete, that thinks it wants to accelerate its window and open this thing up, and again, like kind of late in the team with veterans around Curry and Draymond for like one last kind of push at this potentially, maybe you make the argument that a trade involving those two isn't the most unthinkable thing in the world. Do you include like a Malcolm Brogdon in a deal like that? Obviously, Brogdon's injured, right? And so we don't know what's going to happen there. I don't know if that would potentially work, but I'd be curious because the fact that they're linked to Kuzma is pretty fascinating for a team that does have a pretty decent young core if you're Golden State and has that balance. But do they want to just try to force the issue because they still have Steph Curry and Draymond Green? And I think the most important factor is that relationship, right? Like you said, they didn't reach any deal on the rookie extension. There is this weird dynamic with his role on the team. He gets benched the other day, and then he talked to the media, and he's like, essentially like, got to ask the coach. I don't know. There seems to be something really poor with that relationship. And as a former Warrior can tell you, right, on the Washington Wizards, when the relationship gets poor, then maybe it's just time to go your separate ways. And that would include shipping him off for something maybe a little bit less than what you would ultimately get for him. Who knows? But the fact that they're linked to Kuzma, you're going to have to ship something off of some value.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I agree 100%. You kind of already brought up his name, Malcolm Brogdon, a guy who, he has links to the DMV. UVA player. But the biggest thing with him is not talent, is availability, which, to me, the mantra is availability is your best ability, right? He's had injury issues, former 6th Man of the Year award winner. How much does his injury really bring his value down?
I mean, I think it makes it I haven't seen this. Maybe you could answer it. Have they announced a timeline yet for his return?
No, they initially they did say 6 to 8 weeks, but
okay,
they've been kind of, they really haven't put a timeline out, so it kind of concerns me a little bit.
Yeah, right. So, like, I would assume that he's probably going to be healthy by the time trade deadline comes around, and then you can ship him off. But I mean, I would assume that out of all these guys, he's the biggest favorite to be not on the team by the time the season comes around. I mean, he sat and rotted away at I think it was like for Portland last year, didn't really do much, and then now here you are with Washington. You're a guy that fancies himself a contender. And a guy who should be on a contender to help them win. So you look around, I mean, so like I'm a Clippers fan, for example. Clippers have been floating out there as the team for him for a couple of years now. Oh, yeah. And I think they tried to acquire him last year, ultimately didn't work out. I think that's a team that really makes sense. Like Los Angeles does need more offense, more shot creation, and a guy that can just handle the ball a little bit more. You look at that roster, I think they're very good defensively, but they're not a team that is rife with ball handlers and shot creators unless like a Kevin Porter Jr. really comes along and really starts to take shape again as a scorer that he has been at times. So I think you're probably going to get something okay for him. What you get from them, like, so the Clippers, for example, first-round picks down the road are actually really, really valuable, right? Because they might be awful here in a few years. I don't know if you're getting that, but would assume you're going to get some sort of minimal draft capital or something to go and get Malcolm Brogdon if the Clippers are serious about going and acquiring him, or any of these other teams that want to add just another bench piece to make their backcourt a little bit better.
I agree. His injury, how much does it affect his value? I think it's not so much the injury, is his price tag. I mean, 22.5. Do you want to take a risk on a guy yes, it's an inspiring contract, but again, he's had his issues with injuries. So I think that kind of may scare guys around, away, but I think that also the fact that it is an inspiring contract, you're not handcuffed to him long term. So I think he's definitely tradable asset. Jonas Valanciunas. Now, this was a really good move, in my opinion, under Will Dawkins. Obviously, the Knicks wanted them before they went out and got Cat. The Lakers are still looking at him. This previous game against the Atlanta Hawks, he showed he still has some left in the tank. You can still be that guy in the paint, still be a rim protector, you can still be a high-level rebounder. The biggest thing to me is this, as far as his fit in Washington, they want to push the pace. And he's just, not that he's ever been a sprinter, but he's not that guy anymore. He's having trouble getting up and down the court. So, Kenny, how much value does he have? He can still really play at a high level, even though he's getting older. And, I think that you can't expect that to a certain degree he is going to decline, but he can still play. So how much value does he have to a team like LA?
Yeah, I think that's the question, is like, what are these teams that need another center? What are they going to be willing to ship off? Like you mentioned, Los Angeles. Yeah, a sneaky candidate at the beginning portion of this year. Dario Saric has not been good for Denver. And I think, like, you look at the desperate need to, like, they've never really had a true backup center that they trust behind Nikola Jokic, and he's obviously not going to be Jokic, but he's very good, right? And you could really use him at a cheap price. And their whole thing with KCP was like they didn't want to get into the second apron. Well, like you mentioned, I mean, he's only making 10. So it's not like he's going to really push the cap there. So I do wonder if a team like Denver, who desperately needs a backup center, like you mentioned, Los Angeles, some of these teams that are desperate for some depth behind their big guys, I wonder how much they'd be willing to go and ship off for him. And I do wonder if the Wizards would be willing to just hang on to him. Like, he's a valuable asset. He's not really showing any signs of slowing down. He seems to be content with the role there, at least in terms of what they're asking for early on. But I would think that the demand around the trade deadline, centers, as much as they devalue the position for the most part, it seems that there's a lot of teams that really need a center by the time we get to the trade deadline. And I would assume you're going to get something pretty good for Jonas Valanciunas, given his position and his age. Was really surprised a team like New Orleans. Like, look at where New Orleans is at. Obviously, his former team, and where they're at with the center position. Could they work something out to get him back? But I think that's going to be something that would be pretty valuable, and you'll get too many calls to ignore if you're them. And then, of course, that ignores the fact that you could see other centers go down. And then, of course, the value goes up. The teams are going to call. We're like, dude, we'll take a guy that's going to be on essentially a 2.5-year deal worth $25 million or whatever it's going to be at that point, because he's halfway through the season. Would assume he's going to get a new home relatively quickly, and you're going to get something good for him.
Oh, absolutely. I agree 100%. He still has some gas left in the tank, even though he's still taking his time down the court, but he definitely still has value, because, like I said, he's been impressive in the paint, and I think he's going to be a really good mentor for Alex Sarr, because, I joke about this all the time. He's a known Wizards killer. Every time we played him, whether he was in Memphis, whether it was in New Orleans, he always killed us. You know, he always killed us. So it's good to see him finally play, you know, kill for us.
Yeah.
You know, so all right, man. Like I said, definitely appreciate you coming on the show, man. We're gonna go ahead and call it. Before we go ahead and end the show, how many wins you got for the Wizards this year?
So I don't want to. I've enjoyed my time. I don't want to ingratiate any ill will. But I did bet their win total under 20.5 because I did think that this was going to be a team that was going to ship off the veterans, and it wasn't so much that I thought they were going to stink. It was just I thought they were going to turn it over to the young guys like they should, and that was going to lead to some really tough stretches for a team. And I do think that there's probably, as we see with these organizations all the time, I think Toronto's really doing it. But once you get near the end of the year, and if you're still floating around that like 17 win mark, and given the draft that is right now, I think there's going to be some motivation, like when guys have little nicks and cuts and whatnot. They're like, you know, you take it a little extra day. You know, you take an extra day if you need to or something like that. So I went under 20.5. I think about 20 could be there. But I will say this. They have looked, and it was 2 games against Atlanta, but they have looked very, very, very competent and much better than I thought, especially those young guys that we talked about. Like, I did not expect a leap from Bilal Coulibaly. I did not expect Bub Carrington to look as good and as comfortable as he has on offense. I haven't expected Alex Sarr to be this impactful defensively in the times that he's been on the floor. So I think I'm probably going to be wrong, but I still think around that 20-win mark is a relatively safe bet for this team to ultimately get to.
Yeah, I had a 5-game improvement, so I have around 20 games. I would not be surprised at 25. Like you said, there's guys that are playing better than expected sooner. Yeah. So I could expect, you know, I wouldn't be surprised at 25, but I think around 20 because I think most of the wins are going to be in the first half. Once they make it a youth movement, it's going to be a lot of growing pains in the second half, and it's going to be a lot, you know, but it's good though because they're building that chemistry together on the starting 5. You know, the fact that they played the youngest lineup in franchise history, Keyshawn George, Alex Sarr, Bub Carrington, and Bilal in the starting lineup against Atlanta, I think it's progress. You know, you definitely want to see them get that chemistry together early on. So again, man, appreciate you coming on the show. Definitely had a good time, man. Very informative. Where can people catch you, man?
I'm on Twitter at @JVT. And as you mentioned, VSiN.com. I'm on every single day, Monday through Friday that would be 7 to 11 Eastern.
Yes, sir. Well, hey, man, again, appreciate you coming on, and definitely you guys take the time to check my man out because, like I said, he knows ball. So definitely check him out. So, all right, everybody. Again, we are not going live tomorrow night, and the game on Saturday, we will not be going live Saturday night, but we will be doing a live recap for Saturday's game in Mexico City versus the Miami Heat on Sunday. So again, definitely want to appreciate you, Jonathan, coming on. Definitely chopping it up with me, man. Hail to the Wizards, and we will see you guys next time. Peace.